Hi guys and welcome back to my channel. My name is Daniela and I make sewing and DIY videos. I was going through my stash and I found this pretty green viscose fabric that I used to make new dresses for my girls. Both of them are self-drafted. For the first I used a Pinterest inspiration, and although I would rather make matching outfits, the big sis didn't like it as much and asked for a design of her own. While sewing the dresses, I made yards and yards of narrow rolled hems, and I thought it might be a good opportunity to make a video on how to use the narrow hammer foot. If you would like me to make videos on how I create a garment like this from the beginning to the end, please let me know in the comments below.
In this video, I'm going to show you how to use the narrow hammer foot to achieve pretty rolled hems. I've used it to sew long straight line hems like the ones on dresses like these. I've also used it on curves like full circle skirts on solid light to medium weight woven fabrics, as well as delicate ones like chiffons and silk. I've even used it on more challenging curves like necklines and armholes. I've got my narrow hammer feet with this 42 pieces kit from Amazon. In this set there are 4 narrow hammer feet, which I frequently use. It took me a while to figure out which is used for what, as the set did not come with any manual or instructions. These, together with a couple more, are the ones I seem to use the most. I'll link to the set as well as some other videos on using different feet from this set in the description of the video. Here's what the narrow hem foot does. It makes a tiny, pretty hem which looks good on the face side as well as the wrong side of the garment. The rolled hems look professional and even. And once you get used to this foot and how to feed the fabric into it properly, you can actually sew pretty fast compared to other methods to hem a garment, especially with a narrow hem. Here are the narrow hammer feet that come from this box. 2 are for 3mm wide hems and the other 2 are for 6mm wide hems. The other difference you can notice is that on the bottom side, 2 of them have a tunnel that goes through the whole length of the feet and the other 2 are missing it. The way I figured it out is that the ones with the tunnels are for more solid fabrics and the ones without are for sheer and lightweight fabrics. Depending on the brand and the manufacturer, there might or might not be a tunnel at the bottom of the foot. Here is a close look of the rolled hem on a straight hemline. And here is one I made on a full circle skirt dress. On this dress I also used the narrow hammer foot for the armholes and neckline. It worked well on these cotton fabric armholes, but can be challenging on some slippery lightweight fabrics where I would rather make the rolled hems with the regular foot and fold by hand. First, I'm going to show how to use the narrow hammer foot with this medium weight woven fabric. I'm using the 6mm foot with the tunnel at the bottom. I'm going to snap it on the machine and then adjust the threads so that they both are underneath the foot. I'm using this piece of fabric because you can easily tell which is the wrong side of the fabric here. To start hemming, I'm going to insert the fabric with the wrong side up. I'm going to start sewing right at the beginning of the fabric and with no seam allowance. I am making a couple of stitches, just enough so that the thread holds onto the fabric and without inserting the fabric into the foot tunnel yet. Then I'm going to lift the foot and hold the free ends of the threads as a prop to help me insert the beginning of the fabric into the folding tunnel. I'm pulling front and back slightly to adjust the fabric into the foot. I want my needle at the beginning of the fabric because I want the seam to start right at the top. How much fabric you insert is essential for a good, even, narrow hem. The folded edge of the fabric needs to touch the edge of the foot on the right and doesn't go under the foot. The raw edge of the fabric should touch the other side of the tunnel or slightly go over. Try to feed the same amount of fabric all along so that the hem doesn't spoil. If you feed too much or too little fabric, the hem might get wrinkled, wider, or the raw edge might show on the wrong side. Here is how the finished hem looks. I just love the result, and that's why I like to use this foot often. To hem a curve, the steps would be pretty much the same. I've cut this piece as an irregular curve. I tried to resemble an armhole here. I'm going to start by sewing a couple of stitches at the edge, then holding the thread to help me feed the fabric into the tunnel. I'm positioning the beginning of the fabric under the needle because I want the hem to start from the top. Folding the fabric as I go, I try to make an even fold and not to fold too much or too little. I'm going to go slower here and use the tweezers as a prop as the curve is more challenging than the straight line. That's because my curve is pretty big, but if you are hemming a skirt or a dress, the curve usually would be more shallow and easy to work on. To hem a lightweight fabric like this chiffon, I'm going to switch to the other foot without the tunnel underneath and use a thinner needle. I am following the same steps, putting the fabric with the wrong side up, sewing a bit at the edge, using the threads to help me feed the fabric into the foot, and sew while folding the fabric as I go. If you happen to have only one hammer foot, with or without a tunnel under, don't worry. I'm pretty sure that you can use it on any fabric. Just try it on a scrap to see how it goes. Here are some of the problems you might run into while using this foot. If you fold too little, the raw edge of the fabric will show on the wrong side like this. If you fold too much, the hem will be pretty formed, but the raw edge of the fabric will still show like here. If the folded fabric goes underneath the foot on the right, there might be uneven folds of fabric that might form on the face on the wrong side or on both. This is how I would use the narrow hammer foot in case I need straight lines and corners hemmed. When I sew garments, I usually hem in a circle. That's one of the dresses I've been working on. In this case, I'm going to insert the fabric with the wrong side up, anywhere on the hemline. I usually choose a place close to the side seams and at the back, but that's just my preference. I'm not going to use the threads prop here because there is enough fabric on the back of the foot to help me feed into the foot tunnel. Then I'm going to fold the fabric up and keep it restricted between the edge on the right and the one on the left as I go. For this foot, I'm folding approximately 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter. Once you understand how the foot works and your hands get into the habit of feeding the fabric properly, you can make the hem with a good speed. There are two things that might bother you along the way. One is the hem allowances on the side seams. If you try to feed the seam allowance into the tunnel, the fabric bulk is too much for the tunnel and it would get stuck into the foot or just distort the hem in that area. That's why I like to cut the end of the seam allowance at a 45-degree angle, being careful not to cut too close to the seam so I don't break it and the side seam opens. When I do that, the fabric amount at the hem is reduced, there is no bulk, and I continue as usual. To finish the hem, sew as close to the beginning of the seam as possible. Make sure to leave half an inch or so from the seam so that you get the fabric out easily. Then, with the needle down, lift the foot up. Use tweezers or your fingers to manually fold the rest of the fabric in the shape of the hem. Put the foot down and sew the rest of the hem as you would with the regular foot. Go an inch or so over the beginning of the seam and backstitch to lock the seam. And here's how it looks when done. The place where I've joined the seams look exactly the same as the rest of the hem. Here is the first dress that I've hemmed. There are many inches of fabric that I've hemmed for these gathered layers, and I did it fast and easy with the help of the narrow hammer foot. For more challenging curves like the armholes, sometimes I would use the hammer foot and sometimes I would fold the fabric by hand as I go. It depends on the fabric and how easy it is to work with it. More slippery fabrics like this one are harder to fit into the foot evenly all along the curve, and that's why I prefer to fold the narrow hem by hand as I go. To finish the dress, I've decided to add black tulle to the hem to match the elastic waist and collar. And in addition to that, I've made a tulle flower at the waist. Here is how I did it. I cut approximately 20 stripes of tulle, each 4 inches or 10 centimeters wide, because I want a bigger gathering and I can't decide how much I need just yet. I join them all together at the narrow side. Then I sew a straight line close to the edge, using the edge of the foot as a guide for seam allowance. I start pulling the thread gently so that the tulle gathers as much as I want it to. When I like the look of the gathering, I start pinning it to the hemline. Normally, I would sew it to the hemline, face sides together, and then top stitch on the face side so that the tulle stays underneath. But this time I sew it with a straight stitch on the face side so it doesn't scratch when the dress is being worn, because the tulle I'm using is a bit more stiff. Plus, I decided to add it when I've already hemmed the dress. When I finished with the tulle at the hem, there was a bit of the gathered stripe left, so I've decided to make a flower and put it as an accent at the waist. To make the flower, I fold the stripe as a spiral and sew it by hand at the center. I try to get each layer of tulle with a couple of stitches so that the flower is solid and doesn't get spoiled in the washing machine or when the dress is worn. Then I hand stitch it on the side of the waist. And here are the finished dresses. I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, give it a like and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also ring the bell to get updates when I post a new one. The next one I'm working on is on how to draft and sew a collar and a collar stand like the ones you see on these dresses. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you guys very much and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!